Hey seniors and families, this is Mr. Ream, and on this video we're going to be walking you through some general tips related to 4-year and 2-year college processes for students who are entering their senior year. And what you'll notice in this video is we are going to be keeping this information fairly generalized. It's going to be consistent pretty much year to year. And what we'll share is this video. In addition, we will follow up with a specific senior graduation year video that's going to be a little bit more condensed and focused on just the essential changes or updates or specific information that you might need to know for your given graduation year, because a lot of the stuff stays the same year after year. And so instead of re-recording this information over and over and getting it translated over and over and sharing the link over and over, we are going to do a general one that's going to live kind of in perpetuity for quite a little bit of years. And then we will provide specific updates for things that you do need to know related to your individual graduation year, because that does change some of the stuff that you'll notice coming through your senior year when you're graduating. One note is, in addition, we are also going to be offering information in Spanish. So this video will be translated and re-uploaded into Spanish on our YouTube page, and that link will be shared out typically via email or text. But if you have questions or need information related to translating this, please note, I think there's an extra J in her email, so I apologize about that, but that email is her direct email line, and then Johanna is our translator and interpreter, and then her cell phone is on there as well if you have questions about this or can't find the Spanish translated version. Today though, or on this video, we are going to spend a couple minutes. I'm aiming for about 20 to 30 minutes, and we'll see how close we get, but we're going to be looking at timeline, overview of senior year, kind of some general tips on how to select and find colleges that fit students. In addition to the process, what are some of the application steps that you need to take once you're ready to actually sit down and apply, how to research and create lists, and then what are some tips and best practices both for students and parents. And so thanks for hanging in with me. If you have to pause along the way, if you need to rewind or fast forward, feel free to do that. You can also turn on subtitles if that's helpful too. But the other thing that I just want to mention before we get into the meat of it is we do have a high school counseling website that we keep fairly up to date. This is where you can access meetings and appointments. This is where you can access forms. But there's also a lot of information about the college going process. And you can, on this screenshot, there is a counseling support tab at the top. And underneath there, you'll find college and career counseling with a couple sub-menus. If you click on that and then click on the sub-menus, you'll find a bunch of resources that we try to culminate and pull together and collate for you guys to be able to access regularly throughout the school year. And it's really great information, both for juniors and seniors and like the primary years, but those are going to be helpful tips and resources, and there's also tools on there you can access. But I would encourage you, if you haven't been on the website, definitely explore it. It lives under the programs menu on the North Tahoe High School website. But school for students kind of tends to follow some trajectories, and I want to kind of start with this warning and maybe red flag for all the seniors out there. And also the families that might be watching this, because you might be looking and being like, oh man, what do we got coming up? Because everyone knows senior year tends to be busy and kind of the culminating year of high school. And so kind of effort undertaking on that y-axis and the grades across this x-axis on this graph. In 9th grade, you kind of start with a little bit, it's a shift in gears, but you start to pick up that rigor from 8th grade. In 10th grade, students typically have access to an AP class or two. And the rigor and expectations start to ramp up. In 11th grade, it tends to ramp up a lot. Students tend to imagine and take their most rigorous courses and their most rigorous course loads in their 11th grade year, and sometimes actually even pull back in their 12th grade year, and sometimes there's a purpose for that, but other times it might even go up from here. But generally speaking, in 12th grade, they tend to maybe not need a full schedule. We don't require students to take all 6 classes on campus. So sometimes the effort undertaking actually does drop a little bit in junior year. But there's this weird phenomenon that happens in the springtime of their senior year, and it looks like this. This is called senioritis. This is a window of time, usually in the second semester at North Tahoe High School, that students find out that maybe they only have 3 classes and the beach looks pretty good at this point, or the ski slopes looked pretty good at this point, and sounds better than going to my first 3 classes, or sounds better than making sure that project's done, or if I'm following through on those college application checklists. And so this is a phenomenon that we see in schools, and it's actually a diagnosis. And so laziness, apathy, t-shirts and sweatpants, that's pretty common nowadays. But unfinished homework, frustrated parents, all these types of things are going to be happening to seniors. And most of them are pretty self-aware about it. They know that this will happen, but it's an important notice for families and students to kind of just be aware and be on the lookout for it, because senior year is actually an important year, and following through on the stuff that you have to do. And if you let that slip through the cracks, it really can have some potentially lasting consequences, both in the college and high school world. So we want to try to avoid senioritis as much as possible. So that's just one big kind of red flag I want to throw out there, just knowing that we are going to be navigating senior year together, being aware of senioritis and how that could impact students, and asking for help when you need it from us at school, and we're happy to support. So a lot of times in the end of junior year and into the summer and then into the start of senior year, students are typically essentially they're typically creating these ideas of, how do I determine where I should be going after high school? And this could be applicable to a 4-year college or a 2-year college. They take a little bit of a different process and journey, but a lot of times the stuff that we're going to talk about related to this idea of fit is broadly, you can use a broad paintbrush when we're looking at this. And so when we look at this idea of fit, that's how we find out what schools or what programs or what degree paths or internships or apprenticeships might be the best next step for me. And so there's a couple things. Needs and wants are two of the primary ones. What are some needs? What are some essential things that I as a student want to have in my next experience? And then wants are going to be like, these are the icing on the cake, the bonus points, the things that makes it stand out above maybe the other schools that also have, or the other programs that have the needs that I'm looking for. A couple of the common ones, these are very big picture ones, are going to be your location and size. That's oftentimes where students typically, to be honest, start. How big of a school or how small of a school do they want? And then where might that school be located? That's a pretty pivotal foundational component of fit. And to be honest, up here, students tend to look in two primary places: the mountains, so going up to Montana or Utah or Colorado or maybe the Northeast, and looking at places near kind of that look familiar to this. Or to be honest, the beach. Okay, so your Cal Polys and your San Diegos and Long Beaches and Hawaii's even, and kind of those are two places that students tend to gravitate towards, and for no wrong reasons. But considering the location and size and being broad with some of these to start your fit process if you haven't started to narrow things down. Social environmental interests and concerns. Okay, so like understanding kind of like you are going to be not only learning on campus, but you're going to be living on campus most likely. And so understanding the ramifications of that and what kind of social or environmental factors are going to be important to you as a student. And then academic desires. Sometimes this comes last, actually. And it has to be deeper than, is it a good X major or is it a good school? Good is one of the most commonly misused words in this process, in the sense that it is subjective. And I always kind of retort when I get asked, what's a good school? And it's like, according to who? Because everyone's going to have their own definition of what a good school or a good program is. So really defining that for yourself of what does that actually mean? When I say I want a good architecture program, what does that mean for me? And how can I really understand what that means? Or does it just matter that it's good for somebody else in their own kind of subjective terms? Things like class sizes, graduation rates, any if they offer like pre-professional programs, if you're looking at like graduate schools, all those types of things are going to be some areas to start getting some data on and understanding in relation to the fit element of finding a college. So when we start looking at this process, sometimes students maybe have sat in a job interview. I know families, this might make a little bit more sense to the adults, but sometimes students can also hit this as well. But definitely for parents, you've probably sat in a job interview or many job interviews. And one of the things that I compare looking for a college to a job interview in is that it's a two-way interview. It's a two-way conversation. If you do a good job in a job interview, you're not only going to try to convince this company or this organization of why you're a good fit for this role, but ultimately, like, you have to kind of interview that company and figure out why they might be a good fit for my next step in my journey. Okay, because if all I'm doing is trying to make sure that I'm going to meet the expectations of this particular job or college, then I'm ignoring the facts that this college might not actually help me grow. It might not help me reach the next steps in my career that I'm hoping to reach, or open the opportunities that I'm hoping to open. Okay, so a lot of times when people are looking at colleges, they forget that second part. you're actually interviewing the college. You're determining if this college is actually going to be a good fit for myself and the journey I'm hoping to take. Does it offer me the things I need in my next steps? So don't forget that, okay? Don't forget to be really kind of critical of the schools that you're maybe considering applying to or submitting applications to. And this is a process that will happen throughout your life, but also throughout this process of college and senior year. Just this whole process we're going to talk about of research and fit and thinking about this idea of moving on from high school doesn't stop when you hit submit an application. Realistically, it kind of just starts. You're kind of doing the paper screen when you get on your applications, and then you actually have to do the interview. You have to figure out, okay, so like I'm getting into these schools. Like, how do I determine which schools maybe are going to kind of place a little bit higher in my hierarchy than others? Okay, so that's a really, really important thing. There are a couple helpful tools out there that you can find. These are going to be something that some of them are updated regularly, like the Fiske guide, for example, is one that it's a big old fat textbook typically, and they list a bunch of colleges. That oftentimes has an annual update, and so you can hop on Amazon and actually find the information that you need about very detailed programs at schools. I find this is really helpful to get some kind of subjective research-based results on colleges that maybe you don't see on their website, or find that are kind of hard to suss out of different resources online at a deeper level. So it's a pretty good one. I encourage you to kind of at least take a look at it online. I want to say it's like 20 or 30 bucks on somewhere like Amazon. Rug's recommendation is a little bit more niche, but it's very comprehensive. I'm not entirely sure if they're still around or not, but they might have some older ones that you could find online, but they actually dive into majors, and so the major ideas. Big Futures from College Board, that's going to be another online search that's free for students. It's even more helpful if you have a College Board account, which most of our students do. And then our integrated one, which we utilize here on school quite a bit, is actually called SCOIR. That's that one you see on the screen here. SCOIR is how it's spelled, but you say it SCOIR, like the score of the game is this. And that's a really great tool because it's embedded. All students have access to this, and it has some really deep, detailed insights that students may want to utilize in their research process. A particular one that's really helpful is not only do they have national and state level data in terms of admissions results, it actually has data from our school, North Tahoe High School, going back to 2006. So we can actually look up, okay, so like, yeah, this is the percentage of students getting in to say UC Berkeley for all students everywhere. But this is the percentage of students that actually walked a pretty similar process that you did at North Tahoe High School. And you'll notice like sometimes they're higher, sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's right on par. Okay, so that's an important thing just to note is all students have access to this, and you can actually access through Clever typically. Our team is going to be a combination. We have a growing team, and so we want to support students. Students are the primary person though. Okay, so the student is the person who's making all the decisions, who's driving the ship is usually what I would say. They're the captain. They're the person who's kind of essentially dictating where we're going with this process. Families or parents or caregivers, you are the support system. You're often the financing system, but you're kind of the day-to-day regular interaction with the student, maybe the first mate, who's kind of like supporting and kind of like helping the student figure out a very adult process along the way. And then we have us at school. So I'm a very regular contact for students related to specific college and career supports, but a lot of different things too. It can be stressful, it can be scary. Students can be worried about not having a good decision to make, and so we act in all those different areas. But we'll provide the connection between kind of the at home and outside of school stuff to the school stuff here, and maybe provide some additional support there. We have teachers who write recommendation letters. We have career center tech. We have different roles and tools on campus that we connect students with. But ultimately, we are all working together as a team, and that's really the main piece. But the student is that captain. They are the player if we're doing that team analogy, and they have to actually get in and do the game. We as kind of the coaches, the mentors, the supports can't do things for students. And I'm gonna probably hit on that a couple times. And for parents and caregivers and supports out there that are watching this, it's super important. There's a couple reasons why that it's so important. And the main one is, well, there's two primary ones I'll hit on, and then I won't dig too much deeper. The main one is colleges actually can tell. programs can tell when parents are doing things for the students or when they are getting overly helped in the process. And the main reason they can do that is because it actually takes their voice out of the process. When they are overly helped, the student disappears from the application, from the essay, from the personal statements, from the interviews, all these things, and it's replaced with this kind of polished, buffed, robotic kind of visage of a student that we want to project instead of the actual student. And colleges, to be fair, don't really want the perfect student. They may look that way, and sometimes there are circumstances that is the case, but realistically, the vast majority of colleges out there want the true, honest student. Because you shouldn't have to put on a fancy mask or a perfect picture to feel like you're welcome at the school and that's the only way for you to get in. If that's the case, maybe that's not the school for you. The second reason is when we do that, it also undermines the student. It tells the student, you know what, we don't trust you. We don't trust you with this process enough to let you kind of navigate it. We are going to step in and basically snowplow or helicopter the way through it with you and basically take you out of all but the essential elements. And honestly, sometimes the student feels in the moment like it's a helpful thing, but realistically, in the long run, you are undermining their confidence. You are basically just saying, we don't believe that you can actually do this yourself. A couple things that you want to be aware of in relation to kind of just the time frame for kind of like high school, but then realistically senior year where we're at right now. Ninth grade to now is really kind of like we've been working with students to kind of plan, prepare, wrap brains around, think about this idea of what happens when I graduate. And so we're now at the point where we're starting to make some of those kind of like bigger picture, abstract thoughts come into concrete action. And so if you're watching this in the early part of the school year of senior year, kind of the September, November, October timeframe, we're kind of getting ready. There's still some time to maybe finalize lists for like the four-year college world, refine things. But typically in that kind of mid-fall timeframe, students are going to be starting to actually submit applications. They're going to be completing these things. And so typically September to December, applications are prepared, reviewed, and then actually submitted. Most applications for four-year colleges are going to be due anywhere between, say, even as early as like October to December or January is most common. There are some that are later. November, December is when typically we want to aim for the last, if you're going to be doing some college testing, which we'll touch on in a second too. If you're going to be doing any of that stuff, you want to make sure that all your senior required scores, or the scores you want to submit, are typically going to be at the latest done November or December. Sometimes they are going to be needed to be done earlier in different application types. And then two-year colleges. So if you're looking at a trade school or a junior college, usually that process is shifted a little bit. And so is kind of the flow of it. And I have a separate video that I'll link as well, just about the junior college process, because it is pretty different than a four-year college process. But I think it's important in this to also mention, like, there's multiple paths. Like we think students should have multiple opportunities, and like there is no right opportunity for a student. So just know, like, the two-year college process does typically start a little bit later in a typical senior's year. So December is not uncommon when students start to do it, but they really kind of flip the decision-making process to the front end and actually do the enrollment process at the last part, versus in four-year kind of seeing where you get in, and then you kind of then make your decision about where I'm going to go to school. So in the second half of the year, we kind of do some financial aid stuff, which will start typically in October of each senior's year and then run until about March in California in particular. And we'll, again, have separate financial aid information available because that does have some more detailed changes every year. And we'll, again, call out the specific ones in our follow-up graduation year specific video we'll share. December through May, a lot of times is where our scholarship committees and our local scholarships also happen. So you'll want to double check that in our school graduation year specific video for actual start and end dates. And then May 1st is the nationally recognized college decision day. That's where typically by this day, students will then submit typically a deposit and what they call an SAR, a student intent to register kind of form or response. And that's where they're basically saying, I'm going to go to your school. I'm going to be registering in the fall. And that's also typically right around where students will be starting to register for junior college classwork as well for their first semester, say in the fall of after you graduate. In our list, this is a generic formula. There's no right or wrong. There's no incorrect way of doing this. I do think sometimes we hedge our statistics against us sometimes when we err on the shorter end of this option. So if we only apply to one or two, sometimes statistics are not our friend, and you might end up not with a lot of options. So this is where kind of we want to ensure students have enough choice without going overboard, because the other end of the spectrum is also not lovely to live in either. It's a lot of work, it tends to be expensive, and usually doesn't actually net a whole lot more benefit for students if you apply to, say, 30 schools instead of 10 or 12. Okay, so realistically, this is what I kind of aim for as a kind of a rough recipe. You can then adapt as needed depending on your spice level or how much time you want to spend on it and stuff like that. But you're going to aim for a couple things. So 1 to 3 schools on this far left of the screen is going to be kind of like your expected or likely schools. We used to call these safety schools, but there's no such thing really anymore. But these are going to be like, I am pretty confident that I'm going to be getting into this program. My GPA is great. Like, I'm well within their parameters. They accept a lot of students. Those are the elements that we might be looking for to determine if it's a likely or expected school. The middle 3 to 5, this is where your largest clumping of schools should probably be, is kind of this meet or fit. You're kind of in this target range that you're right around kind of this area where they're admitting most of their students. Like your GPA is right there, maybe a test score is right there. You're kind of in that 50th, 60th, 70th percentile of admitted students. Like, that's really going to indicate that you're going to probably be a solid candidate for this school. And you might not get into all of those schools, but you'll probably get into more than you won't. Okay, and then on the far right, you'll see the reach schools, the not likelies, the extreme reach, very selective. There's a lot of ways to describe them, but these are going to be oftentimes schools where they're denying significantly more students than they have getting in. So, oftentimes this is going to maybe be schools that have 15% or less admissions rates, right? So they're like, you are significantly more likely to not get into this school than you are to get in. And so if your entire list is made up of these schools, you're going to, again, play that statistics game against you, and it's not going to be very helpful for you. Underneath there, you'll see all of these should be first choice schools. You shouldn't be picking schools on this list because mom or dad or uncle went there, and I actually don't want to actually go there, because you might actually go there. Okay, so you should be happy to go to any of these schools, and obviously you might have a hierarchy of like, I would rate this one higher than this one, but if I ended up at this one, I would still be happy. Okay, so I think that's really important note. Don't add schools that you do not want to find yourself at. Our application list for 2-year schools, again, I talked about kind of this flipping of the script a little bit, in the sense that you're actually going to be doing the research, finding the best fit, determining if the school is right for you, and then you're going to basically enroll. They oftentimes will not have a competitive enrollment or admissions process at the 2-year college level. They will at some school specific, say like a pre-nursing program. There might be a welding program. Some more specialized programs could actually have a admissions procedure, or sometimes they maybe have like a dental hygienist program that maybe has some prerequisites and then you have to do an application. So those might be outside of this mold, but in general, the admissions to a 2-year college is open enrollment. Okay, so but you should be thinking about this. You typically are not applying the 7 to 10 rule doesn't apply to junior colleges or typically even trade schools. You're going to typically do all the stuff that you need to do to figure out where you want to be, and then go to that school because you're going to make that choice right then, and you're not going to worry about these other programs typically denying you or having to make multiple choices or multiple applications in that cycle. There are a couple different application types you need to be aware of. I'm only going to hit on the main ones, and we're going to breeze through some of this a little bit. But the common application, it's the big C, big A. I always make that denotation because it is an organization. It's an actual application that's called the common application. But there are multiple little c, little a, not the organization, common applications. And we'll touch on that in a little bit, bullets down this list. But the common applications an organization, they have over 1,000 schools, US-based, international, primarily private schools or out-of-state public schools. You won't see any of our like CSUs or UCs on this application, but this is one that many students will end up using, and it tends to be the one that takes students the most time. And so if your student is going to be applying to a school in the common application, it's very good to get a little bit of a head start in this process because there's writing involved, oftentimes recommendation letters, oftentimes college-specific supplemental questions. So those are all going to be things that you want to kind of get a roadmap in place to understand what your context is in your application. School-specific applications are going to be something that the school in-house develops. Sometimes you have a choice. Sometimes you might be able to apply through the Common App or a school-specific application, and you have to choose if I'm just applying to this school and it's the only school outside of, say, a CSU system that I'm going to apply to. Maybe it's easier, simpler, freer, whatever it might be to do the school-specific application than the whole Common application. But often if you're applying to more than one school that's on the Common App, it saves you time and energy to usually do the Common App. The UC app and CSU Mentor are two little c, little a common apps that go to each of our school systems here in California. And so those schools are going to function in the sense that you can apply to any of the UCs through one portal and one application, and any of the CSUs through one portal and one application directly within the actual application itself. So you're not going to be submitting an application to Berkeley and Irvine separately. It'll be through this one access portal that you would go to. And then finally, the coalition app, you might see that pop up here and there. There's very few schools that require it. Most schools are not ones that typically are really well applied to from North Tahoe High School, but you might see them as an option, or maybe you might apply to one that's required. It is kind of like the Common application, but separate. It's relatively new. It's typically free, but it can be a little bit clunky, to be honest. If you have a choice between the Common application and the Coalition app, I typically steer students towards the Common application. We are much more familiar with it. It's much more common. Students tend to have a better experience from what I've seen historically. We are not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you want to read through this a little bit, you can go ahead and pause the video. I'm going to highlight basically 3 things. One is there's different application types. For the most part, regular decision is your very typical application type. You have early action, or EA, on here. You can see that. That is a non-binding. You submit information earlier to the colleges, and they tend to tell you your results earlier. There's typically no major admissions benefit to an early application window. Some schools may message different things, but as a general rule of, that's not a good statement. As a general application of the rule, don't expect a whole lot of like, oh my gosh, it's going to like make or break my application if I get in early. It can actually sometimes backfire because your application might not be as good. You might rush it. You might not have the strongest recommendation letter, or you might skip an extra review on your essay to get it in by this earlier deadline. And more people are thinking that earlier is better, and sometimes it actually is not. So really think through your timing, really think through your timeframes, and if you have questions, you can ask. The other one I want to mention too is early decision, or early ED. That is a binding agreement. It is legally binding. This is the circumstance where you are 150% sure this school is the school for me. I have money to pay for it. I'm ready to rock and roll. I have no issue with, if you say yes, of withdrawing every other application out there. It's a big deal. It is not for everyone. I would say it's for like 5% of students or less. Like, it is a huge deal to do early decision, but it also does come with a little bit more of an admissions benefit. And so we can talk through that a little bit more specifically if you have questions about it, but just know there are different types of applications there. A couple tips that will be helpful for you along the way. So do review your application. This is not a quick gloss over it and make it happen approach. You should be scouring your application and having other people scour your application before you submit. Okay. Faster is not better in this process. You don't want the number 7 in your name. You don't want to misspell things or like misrepresent yourself. You want to submit your very best work and your very best shot, because it's your only shot typically. And so you want to make sure that you're taking the steps needed to make sure that you are polishing yourself. And it doesn't have to be like that you have to have the perfect essay or things like that. It's really, you just want to make sure that you are happy with what you're submitting for yourself. Deadlines do matter. And at North Tahoe High School, we tend to be rather soft with our deadlines, and sometimes detrimentally so when they translate into college, because they are not joking. When they say 11:59 p.m., you should be asking, where is the server based? Because is it 11:59 on the East Coast, or is it 11:59 on the West Coast? Those are as specific as those deadlines are. And if you are like stuck in the payment loop and it's not in, you will not have that application submitted. So you do have to make sure that you understand deadlines, and your team of coaches and supports talking to students, we cannot keep track of your deadlines for you. And oftentimes we don't have those deadlines handy. So you have to kind of create that calendar. Be honest on your applications as well. This includes the FAFSA, your financial aid application system, which again, we'll have a whole separate thing about. Don't exaggerate, don't embellish, don't lie, obviously, but like sometimes people kind of like, sweeten the pot a little bit and say like, oh, I did this for 20 hours when really it was 10. This is you're presenting yourself, and so they very well probably won't check some of that information. But I've had calls when something sounded too good to be true or didn't match up with what someone else said. I will get a call and say like, hey, we're kind of confused. They said they did this. The person who wrote the recommendation was the supervisor, and they said they didn't do this, and like we're not sure what's happening. And then finally, and this is actually fairly important because you got to check your emails. You, the student, are the only person who's going to get the information that you need to know regarding missing things, stuff that's due, stuff that's required for you to do to move on to the next step in the process. You have to check your email, and you have to check your portals, which you will get access to once you've once you've applied to schools. If you do not, it might jeopardize your admissions. Okay, it will not spoon feed you the process. You will have to actually sometimes dig it up or make phone calls or reach out. And again, we are here to help you with that process, but you have to take some of that ownership as well. We talked about testing briefly. Let's talk briefly through how now this might impact you. Again, for seniors, the testing process is typically wrapped up by November, December at the latest generally. But realistically, the why and the how is kind of like a big question is, should I submit this? Most schools out there are test optional, meaning you can choose. And there's different verbiage now, and every year it seems to be more that pop up: test free, test blind, test suggested or preferred, like all kinds of different language that just honestly provides confusion. Realistically, though, most schools you can approach as a test optional perspective, meaning you get to choose. Do I feel like this exam represents who I want? And then sometimes there are schools out there that will, you might want to game plan a little bit. Sometimes if your score's in that 75th percentile for that admitted students range when you look them up, that might help you. If it's not, and you have the option to not submit it, many schools might suggest you don't. Okay, so it's realistically going to be up to you. And then you can typically take the ACT or SAT and use them roughly interchangeably. There's concordance tables online that you can actually cross-check. But we talked about how there's different testing policies out there. The CSU and UC system continues to be what they call test-free or test-blind, meaning they will not consider your SAT or ACT scores in your admissions process. Sometimes they might use something like that for a placement purpose, but realistically, you can just basically imagine they're not going to see any test scores, even if you wanted to submit it and you had a perfect score. It's going to be based on the elements that they are saying are helpful for you. So we need to kind of start looking at how we're going to make some of these good decisions, because we have to spend some time determining what schools end up on my list of where I'm applying. And so we have to kind of identify what are our targets and our priorities related to this process. Okay. So I put up 3 things on here that I think are going to be helpful. Okay. What are some things that are going to be really important to you in a college? Pick 3 to 7 at the most. And 3 is maybe even a lot. Maybe pick 2. Okay. Be really specific. That is one error that people make, is they're very generic or general, and they don't really spend time thinking about what really does matter to me in a college and at what level. Okay. Because those schools, you want to be able to look at and see, like, do they have these 2 things that really matter to me? Do they have housing on campus? Maybe that's a big one. Maybe it's got to be within driving distance from home in a day. Like, sometimes those are big must-have items. The nice to have, these middle grounds, pick another couple. These are like extra bonus points on top, icing on the cake. Okay. They will help you typically sway some decisions later on the process, but usually are not deal breakers. And then the must not have category, these are the list limiters. I'm going to avoid schools like this. Okay. A couple examples of this could be like, again, size for these must haves. Do I have access to research opportunities with professors? Maybe having a club curling team was interesting to you, but it was like, I would go to school without one. Might be a nice to have. And then avoiders, what might be like, Maybe they give you a huge financial aid gap that you can't make the difference up in. Maybe you are looking for a school that has strong representation of LGBTQ plus community, or a particular political climate leaning. Those are things that maybe you want to have or not have or avoid or have on campus that will matter really a lot to you. But a lot of times we put the cart before the horse. Sometimes we are shopping in the wrong department. And I use the analogy of a car, shopping for a car, which sometimes by being a senior, you've maybe bought a car. But I know families, many times you've shopped for a car, because we can't lump this idea of applying to colleges and the process for people even who kind of look and maybe feel similar, because they might have very different needs. If I walked in and I said, I just want kind of a vehicle with 4 wheels and an engine, it could apply to any type of car, any price point, any size, any amount of seating. Okay, so maybe a particular student is a minivan. Maybe they want to have a close family knit environment, or maybe they're really tied to their local family here and they want to be close to home. Maybe they need a minivan scenario. Sometimes maybe they really want to go quickly. Maybe they need a sports car, a Corvette or a Camaro, and they're going to go through an accelerated 4+1 master's and bachelor's program because that's what they're looking for. Others might want to maybe go to a junior college first and then transfer into a 4-year college, and that's going to be their avenue to success, and they're the pickup truck. Okay, so everyone has a different set of goals and different set of needs that's going to benefit them. In addition to just looking at colleges in particular, you also want to kind of pay close attention. We haven't really touched on majors all that much. And this is something that is honestly fairly hard. Finding the right major is a tough prospect for 17 and 18-year-old students who really haven't been out in the world and experienced a whole lot of what the careers out there are like. And the main point I'm going to make with you here, and that I hope you hear, is try to think broadly. A lot of times when students are looking at what do I want to do as a career path, they're thinking, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And in reality, that's not usually the case. They're going to be looking at what's my entry-level job into maybe a career trajectory or a career path. But you do want to consider this. Think deeply about what that could actually mean. Doesn't mean that you have to stay in that. Doesn't mean that, but you want to really consider your options and not just pick one because you're familiar with it, which is kind of a common thing. When students are looking at what do I want to do? Teacher, engineer, police officer, doctor, or nurse are kind of the common ones because we see them around us. We've been surrounded by them for the last 12 years for teachers. We see the police around the community, or on the news, or on Cops or whatever, or Grey's Anatomy and the doctors, and we know it's a well-respected job or things like that. So I wanted you to consider that in the healthcare industry, only 8% of that industry are actually physicians. Okay, 92% of that healthcare industry is something other than a doctor. But when we ask students, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I like medicine, I want to be a doctor. Think about the layers of the different types of roles in not in education, but in the different career paths you're looking at, even in education, like teachers, but there's counselors, there's principals, there's secretaries, there's registrars, there's all kinds of different people involved in so many different industries that we tend to gravitate towards kind of the most popular, most aware, or pinnacle type jobs that you might have you might have heard about. So thinking broad, and then considering different trade-offs in terms of what you might want to do. If you want to be a doctor, you better be ready to go to an additional 10 to 12 years of school after you graduate high school. And so if you don't like school, maybe there's a different way to be involved in healthcare that could be helpful for you. Okay, and just remembering there's always on-ramps and off-ramps. You can go here and then shift, and sometimes that actually makes you a better employee and more marketable. Costs of colleges are important. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but it really does come into play initially to some degree, but realistically, you will get your actual financial aid package at the end of your application cycle. So you can make some estimates, but realistically, you're going to find out how much is this actually going to cost towards the end. But we post an overall financial aid workshop, which will cover information related to financial aid and how the overall process works. But how do we actually get that information, and what kind of steps do we need to take as a senior? A little bit, typically in the fall timeframe of the senior year, in the mid-fall, usually in October or November is when we typically will host those things. So how do we make some of this kind of as painless as possible. Senior year is not designed to be painful. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be interesting. But it does come with a level of stress. So if you're like coasting, that might be as an indicator too, like maybe I'm missing something. Okay, so it should be a balancing act. You don't want to be overly stressed, but we want you to find this healthy balance of how do I keep myself moving forward, or have a healthy level of stress or anticipation, but not overly so. It shouldn't be crippling or like debilitating anxiety about what happens after high school. If that is the case, please ask for help. There's people here to help you. Okay. When we talk about a couple little tips, kind of the main one for seniors, especially towards the start of the school year, is navigating the letters of recommendation process. This is tricky because there is a right and wrong way to do it. In suggested right and wrongs. But your best practice is all students should be completing what we call our senior profile. And that's typically available online. You'll find it on our website. Oftentimes our English classes or pathways classes for seniors, and even sometimes towards the end of the junior year, we'll actually have students start working on this. This is a tool that we use as recommendation writers to make your letters of recommendation, which many colleges or scholarships will need from you or for you, more robust, more rich. It will pull in things that we might not know about you and make it a little bit of a fuller picture when we're writing. In addition, some of the questions that we're asking on there, it's not designed to be extra work. Like it is extra work, but it's not supposed to be like I'm spending hours and hours on this. Like bullet points are fine. If you have a resume and it's replicated on there, attach the resume, just say see resume. Like all that stuff, it's not supposed to be extra busy work, but the questions that are asked are oftentimes the same types of questions you might also need to reflect on in relation to college writing, essays, personal statements, whatnot. Okay, a couple of nuts and bolts about letters of rec. Number one is have your senior profile done before you speak to anyone about your need for a letter of recommendation. Okay. Please do not add us to your Common App or your scholarship essay application without speaking to us first. It gives us a very cold, clinical, this student needs your recommendation. That is not an ask. That is a demand, more or less. Okay. Couple things to note about that is we as staff, myself included, your teachers, are not required to write you a letter of recommendation. So if you kind of burnt some bridges or don't have great relationships or I don't know you, I will not likely write you a letter of recommendation because number one is it won't help you. They can see through a very generic, basic, cold letter of rec. And number two, like it realistically wouldn't serve you anyways. Okay, so like we want to make sure that we are presenting you in the best light, and sometimes we can't. And I would not write one negatively. And so in that case, or in a case that I don't know a student very well or I can't provide an additional context, we'd probably just say, sorry, we can't write one. And there's an option for us to do that. Okay. But you also need to ask, I encourage have your senior profile, ask them in person, like so-and-so, hey, Mr. Ream, I really appreciated taking English with you. I'm applying to some of these schools. I know you're super busy. I'd love to ask if you might be willing to write me a letter of recommendation in support of my applications. Teacher says, yes, great, awesome, I appreciate it. Here's my senior profile. I wrote down the schools that I'm applying to on the back at this point. Here's my first deadline. I'll check in with you close to that deadline and see how it's going and see if you have more questions. That is a perfect 30-second script to ask for a letter of recommendation. We talked about this earlier. Students do need to own this process. Okay, you are going to be leaving high school, leaving the nest, and being able to jump in and be trusted with this process is a really important step. So we want to make sure that we're giving you and honoring you with that process. Doesn't mean you can't have questions. Doesn't mean students can't get help, but you should struggle through it a little bit. As a student, like you should do some research. You should ask some questions. You should maybe make a phone call or two. You should maybe ask some people around you and make those steps yourself because it helps you to grow not only through this process, but into the next phase of your process because college or life or work will function a lot different than high school does. Okay. So just reiterating, you have access to some of the resources on there. So SCOIR, again, is that free college and career readiness tool you have access to. I highly encourage you taking advantage of the information that's on there. And students, we've kind of worked through in different fashions, whether it's through pathways or classes, showing you a couple of these things. This is the college kind of and career counseling page that I mentioned earlier on our website. There's a couple links in there that are helpful. This college app spreadsheet template, if it's still on there, is excellent. It helps kind of keep all this information and put it all in one place so you can quickly look at it. A link to the senior profile you can see as well. This is a link, or this is an image of that senior spreadsheet where you can kind of see it's almost like a scavenger hunt, and it's helpful to maybe search for some of the stuff that could be helpful in the application process. There are different college application resources on their websites, from whether that's the UC system or CSU system, that you can actually access that get updated annually. So update with any personal insight question changes or things like that. As does the Common App. They have Common App Ready toolkits that are available for students with help, walkthrough, tips, FAQs. I don't know how to do this. How do I ask for a fee waiver? All the kind of things that you might want. And then finally, this college resource information is here, where you can actually, you don't have to use these tools. There are lots of tools out there. There are a lot of resources. I encourage you to find the one that works best for you. If you're not sure if it's a reputable resource, ask. We can take a look. We can make sure that you're not going to be putting in private information into some sketchy website that, you know, steals your identity or something like that, because sometimes they ask you for that kind of stuff. So please ask questions if you have them. There's not a dumb question. I just encourage you to take advantage of the resources that are out there first. And oftentimes it is, I know when I have a question, it's more rewarding when I can find the answer myself than if I have to go ask someone typically. And so if I feel like I can look it up and do a little research, definitely encourage you to do the same, because it can boost that confidence and you feel a little bit more fulfilled through that. But that's going to be the end of our conversation for today. Again, keep an eye out for the annual follow-up that we'll be sending typically in the fall of each year. If you're getting an early start on this and say you're a junior and kind of catching this video, revisit it, and then we will send out annual updates with the year-specific information that will be much shorter than this one, just with some notes that you might need to take related to what changes or updates or new information might be useful for you in a particular time of graduation. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Again, my name's Jeff. If you have any questions following this, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we are happy to navigate you through the senior year process. Have a great one.